There's a strange point that happens as a man gets older. You stop caring quite so much about being liked. Not because you suddenly become cold, not because you think you're better than everyone. You just start noticing something quite strange. A lot of the things that you've been doing for years, you weren't actually doing because you wanted to. You were doing them because you wanted people to approve of you. You took the job because it sounded impressive. You stayed in that relationship because you didn't want people asking questions. You said yes when you wanted to say no. You laughed at things that you didn't even find funny. You kept explaining yourself to people who had already made up their minds about you. The weirdest part, you probably didn't even realise you were doing it. You were doing it on a subconscious level, because needing approval doesn't always look like insecurity. Sometimes it looks like being the nice guy. Sometimes it looks like being ambitious. Sometimes it looks like being easygoing, and then sometimes it even looks like confidence. But underneath it, there's this constant little question running in the background. What are they going to think of me? When that question starts disappearing, your whole life starts to feel better. It starts to feel different. You start feeling like you're on a new level. You stop explaining yourself, thinking about the last time somebody questioned a decision you made. Maybe you changed jobs, started going to the gym, you moved somewhere. Maybe you started to realise that a relationship was coming to an end. You started a business, whatever it was. If you're still heavily dependent on approval, your instinct is probably to explain. Give them the whole story. You tell them why you did it. You want them to understand. And if they still don't agree, you explain it again, because you're not really trying to explain the decision anymore. You're trying to get permission to make it. That's the difference. Eventually, what you realise is that something quite freeing is happening inside you. People don't have to agree with your decisions for your decisions to be right for you. You can tell your friend what you're doing. He can say something like, mate, I think you're making a mistake. And you can actually listen. Maybe he does have a point, maybe he doesn't. But you don't feel this desperate need to convince him. You can just say, yeah, I understand why you think that. I'm still going to do it. That is a very different mindset, because you're no longer asking people to approve the life that you're building. You're just letting them see it. And that leads to something even harder. You become okay with disappointing people. This is one of the hardest things for a man to learn. Sometimes doing what's right for you means somebody else is not going to be happy, and you have to let them be unhappy. You can't keep everybody comfortable. You can't always be available. You can't always say yes. You can't keep doing favours that you resent. You can't keep spending your weekends doing things that you don't want to do because you're scared somebody will think that you're selfish. At some point, you have to be able to say, no, I can't. At some point, you have to just leave it there. No 20-minute explanation, no 5 apologies, no excuse that you carefully construct so that they won't be disappointed. You just say to them, no, I can't. And yes, they might be annoyed. They might think you've changed. They might even call you out and say that you're selfish. And this is where a lot of men cave. They can handle somebody being angry with them for 4 or 5 minutes. What they can't handle is the feeling that they've become the bad guy. So they go back, apologise, and they give in. And everything goes back to normal. But the ability to tolerate somebody else's disappointment is actually a huge part of becoming your own man. Because if you need everyone around you to be happy with you, they're going to end up making your decisions for you. And once you understand that, something else starts to change. You stop performing your life for other people. And that might be even harder to notice, because sometimes you don't realise you're performing until you finally stop. There's a big difference between living your life and constantly thinking about how your life looks to everybody else. You can have a good job and you can secretly hate it. You can be in a relationship that looks perfect from the outside and still feel miserable in the inside. You can have the nice car, the clothes, the holidays, the photos, and still feel like you're trying to prove something. And social media makes this even easier to do, because now you don't just live your life, you can watch yourself living it through other people's lives. You can go somewhere nice and part of you is already thinking about that picture. You achieve something and before you've even enjoyed it, you're thinking about who you're going to tell. You buy something you've wanted for years and suddenly you're wondering whether people will think it was worth the money. Slowly, without noticing, you start confusing being seen with actually being happy. That's a dangerous place to live, because eventually you have to ask yourself this question. If nobody could see this, would I still want it? Would you still want the job? Would you still want the car? Would you still want that lifestyle? Would you still be working this hard? Would you still want that relationship? That's a question worth sitting with, because the answer might surprise you. A lot of the things are impressive from the outside, but completely empty when you're the one who's living with them. And as a man becomes more secure, he starts caring less about what looks impressive and more about what actually feels right, what's practical. He might stop posting everything. He might stop talking about every achievement. He might even choose the less impressive option because he knows it's better for him. And nobody else might notice. That's the point. He's not doing it to be noticed anymore. He's doing it because it's his life. And that same mindset starts showing up in relationships. You stop chasing people. This is probably where the change becomes most obvious. You stop chasing people who aren't choosing you. And I'm not talking about playing games. I'm talking about recognizing when you're putting in 90% of the effort and somebody else is putting in 10. Maybe it's a friendship. You always text first. You always make the plans. You're always constantly checking in with somebody. And if you stop, nothing happens. At first, you make excuses. He's busy. She's got a lot going on. They're probably just bad at texting. Maybe that's true. But sometimes the answer is much simpler. They're just not that interested. And that's a pill that you should be ready to swallow. When you need approval, the realization is painful, because your first thought might become, what do I need to make them value me? So you try harder. You become more available. You become more useful, even more agreeable. You start changing little things about yourself because maybe eventually they'll choose you. But eventually you'll realize something. You cannot perform your way into somebody genuinely valuing you. You can be funnier. You can be more successful. You can always be there. You can give more. You can become whatever you think they want. And if they don't genuinely value you, none of it will be enough. That's when a man starts to pull back. Not because he suddenly does not care. Oh, he does care. He just finally understands that chasing somebody's approval is costing him a lot of self-respect. There's a huge difference between I really wanted this relationship to work and I need this person to choose me. The first is human. The second is a trap. And once you understand that, rejection starts to feel different too. Criticism doesn't hit the same anymore. Someone criticizes you and you don't immediately fall apart, but you don't immediately get defensive either. You just think about it. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. Because when you rely heavily on approval, criticism feels like an attack on who you are. Someone says you're lazy. Suddenly you're thinking about every time you've been lazy in your entire life. Someone says you're not good enough. Now you're questioning your career. Someone might not like you. Now you're wondering whether there's something fundamentally wrong with you. One person's opinion suddenly becomes a verdict. But as you become more secure, you learn to separate. Someone doesn't like something about me from there's something wrong with me. Those aren't the same thing. And this is important. Not every person who criticizes you is jealous. Sometimes people tell you things that you don't want to hear. And they're right. A man who doesn't need constant approval can actually listen. He doesn't have to protect his ego every time someone points something out. He can say, fair enough, I'll think about it, and then decide what to do. That's real confidence. Not believing you're always right. Being secure enough to admit you might be wrong. And once you can do that, you stop needing something else too. You stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop trying to be understood by everyone. This one takes time because being misunderstood really, really hurts. Especially when you know your intentions were good. You can do something for the right reasons and somebody can still interpret it completely differently. And your instinct might be to correct them. That's not what I meant. You've got the wrong idea. Let me explain. And sometimes you should explain. Sometimes you just have to let them think what they're going to think. Because here's the reality. You cannot control the story people tell themselves about you. Someone can watch you leave a relationship and think that you gave up. Someone can watch you work less and think you've become lazy. Someone can watch you set boundaries and think you've become selfish. Someone can watch you change and decide they don't like the new version of you. You could spend your entire life trying to correct those opinions, or you can accept that people are going to have their own version of you, and you don't have to manage it. That's incredibly freeing for a man, because when you stop trying to be understood by everybody, what happens is you finally have more energy to understand who you are, to understand yourself, and that's where the real change becomes. You start making decisions completely differently. You stop asking, what will people think about me? And you start asking, what do I actually believe? And that question can take you somewhere that you didn't expect. Eventually, you notice the questions in your head start changing. You stop asking yourself, what will people think? And you start asking a different kind of question. You start asking, is this actually what I want? Does it fit the kind of man I want to become? Am I doing this because I believe in it or because I want people to respect me? Those questions are harder because there isn't always a socially correct answer. Sometimes doing what's right for you means people won't understand. Sometimes growing means leaving behind people who preferred the older version of you. Sometimes becoming more disciplined means people call you boring. Sometimes protecting your peace means someone tells you that you've changed. And sometimes you have to accept that. Because if your value changes every time someone has an opinion, they're not really your values. They're just reactions. And man becomes grounded when his principles become stronger than the pressure around him. And that doesn't mean becoming stubborn. It means knowing what matters to you, knowing what you're willing to sacrifice, knowing what you won't compromise, and being willing to stand by those things even when nobody's clapping for you. Because that's another thing you eventually realise. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. You're worried about what you said. They're probably thinking about what they said. You're worried about how you looked. Well, they're probably thinking and worrying about how they looked. You're replaying that awkward moment from 3 days ago. They probably forgot about that it even happened. And once you realise that, you start to feel a lot more relaxed. You realise you've been performing for an audience that wasn't even paying that much attention. You stop needing approval. This is probably the biggest change of all. You start understanding that approval doesn't actually solve insecurity. It only quiets it for a little while. You get the compliment. You get the promotion. Someone tells you that you're attractive. Someone tells you that they're proud of you. Someone notices your success. And for a moment, you feel good.